Welcome to the Farm to Animal Conference eSummit. My name is Kelsey Leach, and we're joined here by Murray, one of 350 residents who live at the sanctuary. Murray was actually rescued 17 years ago. He is one of our oldest and longest residents here at the sanctuary. He's mad I did not bring him treats today, but that's okay. We're going to move on to our next presentation. We're so excited to introduce you to our next guest, so we hope you enjoy the Farm to Animal Conference eSummit and hope that you have a good day.
Well, hello, everybody. It is great to see you all here at Faces. My name is David Kay. I'm a board member at Animal Place. For my day job, I'm the director of communications at a company called Upside Foods, which is growing real meat directly from animal cells. I'm really excited to introduce our esteemed speaker today, Jonathan Balcombe. So Jonathan is a biologist with a PhD in ethology, the study of animal behavior. His books include Pleasurable Kingdom, Second Nature, The Exultant Ark, and What a Fish Knows, a New York Times bestseller now available in 16 languages. His latest book for grown-ups, Superfly, won the 2021 National Outdoor Book Award for Natural History Literature. His children's book, Jake and Ava, A Boy and a Fish, was published in November 2021 by the Gryphon Press. Before focusing on writing books, Jonathan worked on several animal protection organizations, a medical technology firm, and as a professional editor. Jonathan has appeared in several films and television programs, including the 2021 film Seaspiracy and the 2021 documentary on the aquarium fish trade, The Dark Hobby. He lives in Southern Ontario, where in his spare time, he enjoys biking, baking, birding, Bach, and trying to understand the neighborhood squirrels. So thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. And I'm going to invite you to share your screen and tell us all about fish sentience.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to anyone who's attending this talk, this pre-recorded talk. So let me launch straight in. Can you see the slide okay, David? Great, thank you. We generally consider fishes in one of two main contexts: a source of food, maybe not this audience for the large part, but society at large does tend to view animals this way, fishes this way, and or a source of recreation, a fun thing to do on the weekend or after work. Today, my goal is to try to encourage people to think about fishes through a different lens, from the fish's perspective, if you like. And the first kind of main point I want to make is just how successful as a group fishes are. They're the most diverse group of vertebrates by far. In fact, if you combine all the birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians together, they still don't reach as many species as there are fishes on the planet today. And just a sampling of this diversity here. There are actually two major groups of fishes. One is the bony fishes, of which all but two are representatives here. The exceptions are the cartilaginous fishes. The shark and the electric ray in the upper left are members of the cartilaginous fishes. I point that out because these two groups are as evolutionarily distinct as birds are from mammals. We collectively call them all fish or fishes because they tend to be streamlined and have fins. They've evolved in an aquatic medium. But there are, of course, a huge range of shapes and sizes of these creatures. And to wit, a couple of superlatives about fishes. The smallest known vertebrate is actually no longer this fish of Philippine lakes. There's a smaller species has since been described, but they can get pretty small. You can put 300, I don't recommend it, but one could put 300 adults of this tiny little Philippine fish onto one side of a scale, and an American penny, or a Canadian penny if you like, on the other, and the penny would go down. They're that tiny, and yet the complexity, nature is masterful at miniaturization, the complexity packed into this tiny little organism, all of the living systems we have, reproductive system, digestive system, excretory system, nervous system, endocrine system, skeletal system, etc. It's all there and yet packed into a tiny space. Another superlative that goes to fishes is the longevity record. The current known longevity record for an animal living on planet Earth is this species here, the Greenland shark. And based on studies of analysis of eye tissue from fishes, from sharks who were sadly caught in fishermen's net, the estimates of these ages are upwards of 400 years and possibly more than that. So there's probably a few Greenland sharks swimming under the Arctic ice right now who were living and respiring and living their lives before Shakespeare started writing his plays. Just a couple of favorites of mine in terms of just how they look, but also names. The Hawaiian reef triggerfish has possibly the longest name of any fish. The Hawaiian natives call it the Humu Humu Nuku Nuku Apua'a, which apparently translates to the fish who grunts like a pig and sews with a needle. So there's obviously some cultural history to this fish among the native Hawaiians. My nominee for the most aptly named fish goes to this diagonal banded sweet lips. I don't know if there are any more kissable lips than those. Let me move on then to fish minds. Do fishes have minds? Oh, yes, they do. And they do remarkable things with those fishy minds. So let's just scratch the surface. And that's all we can do in the short time today, just to give you some highlights. What about tool use? I mean, fishes lack grasping hands, so they have fewer options for using tools, but they have a good brain and a good mouth and a strong body. This tusk fish here, before this scene was photographed, and by the way, you can see this and many of these sorts of phenomena that I'll be talking about today in YouTube videos if you care to look them up. This fish has already used water as a tool to blow sand off the surface of the bottom to uncover a clam, which the tusk fish then grabs in the mouth and swims perhaps 30, 40 meters to a suitable rock or a piece of coral. This is probably a known rock or coral. In fact, I watched a BBC clip the other day with David Attenborough narrating, showing a fish, one of these tusk fishes of a different species that goes to a particular place with a particular rock that's used like an anvil. So this is a very planned behavior. And then with a series of well-timed and well-coordinated head flicks and releases, the fish eventually is able to smash the clam and get at the contents within. Note the bystanders, or perhaps we should say by swimmers swimming nearby of different species. They know what's going on. They're waiting for a chance to scavenge some of the spoils. So that's an example of tool use in a fish. Fishes are often demeaned as having poor memories. This is an example of a fish that puts the lie to that. This is a frill-finned goby. It's about a 4 or 5 inch long, cute little fish of the Atlantic coastline. And these fishes live in the tide pool zone between low and high tide. And it's been noticed that these frill-finned gobies are able to jump accurately from one tide pool to another to get away from an octopus or a heron or some other predator, which raises the question, how do they know which way to jump and how far to jump to avoid making a leap of faith and ending up stranded on the rocks somewhere? Turns out they memorize the tide pool zone at high tide. So a few hours after this photo was taken, the tide comes in, of course, and this area is covered in water. And the fishes at that point swim down among the nooks and crannies and they memorize it. Scientists call this mental mapping. They make a mental map. And captive studies show that they can memorize a tide pool zone in one day, and they can remember it and use it to their advantage up to 40 days later, perhaps more than 40 days later, without any intervening experience with it. So it's stored in their memory for long weeks at a time, despite no experience with it. So it's a superb example of memory in a non-human, and it's something that we probably couldn't do. Back to tool use, this is another form of tool use, once again using water, but this time instead of blowing water on the sand to uncover something, it's squirting water like a jet, like a projectile, to catch insects outside of the water. This is the aptly named archerfish, of which there are at least 6 known species. And they are very flexible about this behavior. They have to learn it, and they can learn it by observing other experienced individuals doing it. So that's an example of learning by observation, which for one thing is considered a pretty high level cognitive skill. Also, vis-a-vis the flexibility, they may squirt at the insect on a leaf. They typically don't squirt directly at the insect. They will squirt at the leaf to hopefully knock the insect in the water. If they hit the insect, it might knock it further on land. So that's not what they want. So that's a rather nuanced aspect of the behavior. But they also use different techniques depending on how far away the insect is flying. They can actually catch insects in flight by using this technique. And if the insect is flying close to the water, they squirt directly at it and rotate their bodies at the same time as the insect's moving. If it's further away, they use kind of more the quarterback pass technique, or the football pass, or soccer pass, where they squirt water ahead, hoping that it will collide with the insect. As you can imagine, that takes a lot of skill. They also, careful studies done in Germany show that they actually can control the amount of water at the end of the jet, at the leading edge of the jet, and that is useful for bigger or smaller insects. A beetle, for instance, might need a bigger projectile of water. So there's a remarkable amount of complexity in this behavior and flexibility, and it isn't just programmed, they have to learn it. Now, because archerfishes squirt water out of into the air, scientists cottoned onto the idea, why don't we present them with touch pads? And as you can see in the right panel of this photograph, panel C, an archerfish is being presented with two faces, two rather similar looking faces. And this is from a study that was published a few years ago, looking at the age-old question of, can a fish recognize a human by their face? People who keep fishes in aquariums, and I'm not recommending that, but they will claim, my fish knows me. There can be a group of people in the room and the fish is showing no interest. And then when I come into the room, Joey swims out and is ready to get fed. It sounds like recognition of individuals. And it turns out, yes, indeed, they pass this test with flying colors. Even when hair is removed on the left, or ears are removed in the middle, you can present them with one familiar face among 40 unfamiliar faces, and the fish who's trained with a reward, if they squirt water at a familiar face, will squirt at that one familiar face among the 41 faces. So another pretty impressive cognitive skill. What about recognition of an upside down face? It turns out that fishes struggle with they have what's called the face inversion effect, where they struggle to recognize a familiar fish who's been flipped upside down. Of course, this is probably not going to happen much in a fish's world, so maybe it's little wonder that they're not very good at recognizing an upside down face. We aren't either. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, are quite good at it, and it probably relates to the fact that they get some practice. Animals are tend to be good at what's useful to them and or what they've had experience with. One of the most intriguing findings I encountered when I was researching my book, What a Fish Knows, was that fishes have been tested on and fall for the same types of optical illusions that we do. This is just one example I'll give you here. This is called the Ebbinghaus illusion, in which the two orange dots are the same size actually, but they look different size. The one on the right looks bigger than the one on the left here, because of the arrangement of blue dots around the outside. It creates the illusion of difference. And if you train a fish, there's a few species have been tested on this, and you train them to poke their nose against the larger of two circles and then present them with this Ebbinghaus illusion, randomized of course, but in this case, they would poke at the orange dot on the right side because they perceive it to be larger, just as we do. And if you presented this with a robot to a robot, the robot would not be fooled at all. The robot would make some kind of internal measurement, absolute measurement, and would recognize that they're the same size. Fishes are not robots. They're biological beings, individuals with thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and fallibility. We're all fallible, and fishes are no less so. And in fact, there's a lot of deception that happens under the water as well as on land for their animals taking advantage of the fallibility of other animals in their midst. So I think it's quite poignant a finding. It shows that fishes have beliefs, and those beliefs can be wrong. This is a blue-striped cleaner wrasse. It's a single one looking at him or herself in the reflection in a mirror. And this is a photo taken from a study showing mirror self-recognition in this species. when they're presented with a mirror and they have a dot of gel, colored gel, surreptitiously placed on their body. They will try to remove the dot. They may rub it against the bottom. They will change the position of their body to inspect themselves. The idea here is that they couldn't see the dot on themselves unless they see their reflection in a mirror. If the animal did a threat display or swam behind the mirror, that would suggest they don't recognize it as themselves. But once they're used to having a mirror in their midst, they behaved according to what you'd expect with them recognizing that reflection as themselves. There's a lot more that could be said about that study. There's actually been two studies. More recently, the same research team used a much bigger sample size and some refinements because there was so much objection from the scientific community, so much skepticism. It just shows our deeply built-in biases against fishes that anyone would think that, oh gosh, can a fish actually recognize themselves in a mirror? Does a fish have a sense of self? It appears that they do. Which leads nicely into fish society and how fishes interact with each other. Most interactions are within species, but also we have between species interactions, such as between these two large reef predators, a grouper on the top, there's many species of groupers, and a moray eel on the bottom, in this case, a green moray eel. These two individuals are about to set off on a hunting foray in which they collaborate. The grouper will have invited the moray eel by swimming over the moray eel's lair and doing a head shake. It's a head shaking gesture. That's a referential communication signal. It's referential because it's referring to something that's going to happen in a different time and space. Again, a high level cognitive ability as far as biologists are concerned. And the way it works is, of course, that the moray eel is able to chase an unfortunate fish that they've targeted for prey into the reef matrix and may catch it and eat it there. But if the fish escapes into the open water, the grouper, of course, is waiting. And captive studies done at Cambridge University show that when using fake moray eels laminated between layers of plastic that can then be controlled by the scientists by using a pulley with fine wires, show that a grouper who encounters cooperative and uncooperative moray eels will preferentially select the cooperative one the next day. So that shows that it's not willy-nilly. These are probably long-term relationships where groupers of moray eels have worked together before over long periods, and they've had success. The success rate when they collaborate is estimated to be up to 5 times the success rate when they hunt alone. This is based on primarily on observational studies and data collection. Another mutualism, if you like, another cooperative arrangement across species is the famous now cleaner-client mutualism on reefs. We once again meet the cleaner wrasse, the blue-striped cleaner wrasse, which is the most famous of the cleaner species, although there are other species who also apply this trade. There's even a species of blenny, or more than one, a different fish that mimics the cleaner wrasse, and instead of removing parasites, which is what these ones do, takes a chunk of flesh off the host species. So there's always someone trying to take advantage of a nice situation. But the way this works is, of course, it's a mutualism because both parties benefit. There's over 100 different species, known species of so-called client fish. A porcupine fish or puffer fish is the example here. And you can see the cooperation going on. The client, who is a predator and could eat one of these cleaner wrasses, but it's not a good idea to eat your business partner. The little client fish opens the mouth, opens the gill covers, and lets these fishes go in with impunity. And they remove parasites that lodge on the gills and in the mouth. They also carefully pluck parasites off the skin. It does get Machiavellian even here. Sometimes they may nip a little bit of mucus off the client, which makes the client quite unhappy. The cleaners then may mollify the client by performing pectoral fin caresses against the client fish. Careful observational studies show that the cleaner wrasses are prone to doing a much better job if there's a lot of clients in the queue. Whereas if there's few clients in the queue, their eBay ratings are not going to suffer so much if they do a shoddy job. So it's complex, it's well studied. There's probably over 150 published articles about this phenomenon and new discoveries about it happening all the time. This is a picture you may or may not have seen. This is a phenomenon discovered off the south coast of Japan about 10 years ago, a previously undescribed species of another pufferfish, in which the male spends days, hours and days building and maintaining this 6-foot wide, beautiful mandala structure. It's like a work of art, and I think it speaks to the possibility that fishes have a sense of aesthetics, just as the peacock's tail evolved to impress a peahen, not a human, even though we were very impressed by it. Similarly, this fish spends a lot of time, the little male here, building this beautiful structure in the bottom of the water, about 80 feet down in this case. And so he works hard, and if he's successful, he will attract a female who, if she's duly impressed with his artwork, she will select him as a mate, and they will lay eggs and fertilize their eggs in the middle of the mandala, cover it with pebbles and bits of shell, and try to keep an eye and keep them safe until they hatch out. This is an example of what Charles Darwin called sexual selection. It's an example of a trait that evolved over long periods of time due to choosiness by females. Females selecting and preferentially mating with males with higher artistic skills, thereby passing genes, more copies of genes of skillful males and artistic males into the next generation. Here's an example of virtue. So now we're into another example of a same species interaction. And here's 4 different species of rabbit fishes. These are vegetarian fishes of the reef. They feed on algae. And it's a little bit dangerous to feed on algae because your head is down. You can't see a predator like a moray eel or a grouper coming. And wouldn't it be nice to have a lookout, someone checking up on you and keeping an eye on things and alerting you of danger? And you can see that's exactly what's happening here. In each pair of fishes, while one is feeding below, there's one pointing up, nose up, playing lookout, foregoing gratification, the gratification of food. The other one's getting to eat while this one is delaying. And that's delayed gratification, which is an example of virtue. As you can probably guess, they switch off every few minutes, and so over time, the 2 individuals get to eat much more safely than if they foraged alone. It's a very nice relationship built on virtuous behavior. You probably heard the term feeding frenzy is applied to sharks, and it's a bit of an uncharitable phrase because it implies that there's just no control. It's a free-for-all, get what you can. Sharks are actually very considerate of each other. They're restrained. They don't want to hurt each other. It looks like that the shark on the right, who just got some food before the one on the left here, this was a chumming operation with people filming it with selfie sticks in the water. It looks like this one on the right, below right, is going to get a nasty chomp on the face. But from the video that I've seen of this, the shark on the left immediately, who I have to say has an expression that looks like shock and surprise, immediately turned his or her head and avoided inflicting any injury on the other one. There is restraint and awareness. Sharks can be social animals depending on the setting, and we will return briefly to that shortly. Fishes do have emotions. I hope you're already getting that sense from some of the examples we're looking at here. One of the most mind-blowing things I've seen, and by the way, just a disclaimer, I don't necessarily endorse the studies that I may be citing. Some of them cause pain and distress to the animals. I am happy to report that the authors of this particular study I'm about to describe, while they did catch and stress wildlife, wild creatures, wild animals, wild fish, they did release them back to their homes, apparently unharmed, and to the specific locations where they were caught. That's more than a lot of published articles will tell you. So this is a species called the striated surgeonfish, and about 32 were captured off the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and then they were subjected to stress by being put for half an hour in a bucket of shallow water. Not very nice. And you can measure stress in one of these by taking a blood sample, small blood sample from the caudal vein, which is just in front of the tail of the fish, and it had very high cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And then they put them in, so they put these stressed individuals individually in a tank of water. The control group was on the bottom, where there was a very realistic painted model of a blue striped cleaner rash. We meet that species yet again. And it's just sitting there. And in the experimental situation in the top, you see there's a larger green box that's a motorized arm that connects to the model of the cleaner wrasse, such that the cleaner wrasse moves back and forth in a sweeping motion. And the idea here was to see, will these stressed fishes seek stress relief by getting a massage from a cleaner wrasse? I mentioned before the pectoral fin caressing that these cleaner wrasses will do. Apparently these client fishes are aware that they have that service. And the difference between these two treatments, top and bottom, was striking. The stressed fish in the bottom ignored the cleaner wrasse, never swam up to it, never got any caressing because it wasn't moving, it couldn't move, it was not attached to a motor. So there were 0 visits per hour. And in the experimental situation on the top, when the cleaner wrasse was making stroking motions, the stress surgeon fishes swam up to it an average of 15 times an hour. That's a hugely significant difference. And their stress levels dropped when they measured the stress level in the blood. It dropped much more quickly, and the other ones that didn't get stress relief. So this says a lot about the emotional lives of a fish. They can get stressed, they can get upset, if you want to use a more pejorative term. They can get upset, and they will take action to relieve that stress if they have the opportunity. And there are actually some fishes, wild fishes, who will swim up to trusted divers, such as this Nassau grouper here on the right, swimming up to a known diver. She sent me this photograph. She knows this fish as an individual, and she caresses this fish, and the fish seems to like it. I'm not saying all fishes necessarily like this, but you can watch quite a lot of YouTube videos of fishes swimming back to people's hands to be petted and even held out of the water. There's complete trust and apparently pleasure going on there as well. Now, what about pain? I haven't mentioned pain much, really, just in passing, but I would hope, in this day and age, most people don't need convincing that a fish can feel pain. They're vertebrates. They've got all the equipment to feel pain. Pain is useful. It's adaptive. It tells you that something's bad. Don't do that again, or move away. But because there's still some debate among some scientists who doggedly continue to argue that fishes cannot feel pain based on a specious argument that their brains are not complex enough. Let me give you an example of I think a very sophisticated method that was used to demonstrate pain in a commonly used fish in labs, the zebrafish, as you can see here. Why you can guess why they're named zebrafishes. They were put in a complex chamber with tank with 2 chambers joined, and one chamber was dimly lit with places to hide, rocks and vegetation, and the other chamber was brightly lit and barren, nowhere to hide. Little fish like this don't like to be in this chamber. They avoid it. All the fishes stayed in this chamber, and they continued to stay after they were injected either with acid, ouch, that's probably going to cause lasting pain, or with a saline solution, which is going to cause an initial prick, and then that's probably about the end of the pain. Until the scientists drizzled a painkiller, lidocaine, in the second chamber, in that chamber they would normally avoid. And then, lo and behold, after doing that, some of these zebrafishes swam over to get pain relief. Apparently, they realized that it felt better if they were swam in that tank because there was a pain reliever there. And it was only the ones who'd been injected with the acid, only the ones who were presumably feeling lasting pain. So it shows that a fish not only can feel pain, but has the wherewithal to take action to relieve the pain and is willing to pay a cost to get that pain relief. It's a clever design, not very fish friendly, of course. The fishes probably didn't like being in the study, and I feel for them. But it is a compelling demonstration that these animals are flexible in their response to pain, and they know how to relieve it if they have the opportunity. Back to kind of this idea that being caressed can be pleasurable to a fish. This is a quite well-known diver and dive instructor, Christina Zanato, on the left here, with a client where they're going down to pet sharks, in this case, gray reef sharks. And she's been diving with these sharks, I think there's in the Cayman Islands for years. She knows them individually. She has names for them. They know her. They come up, they literally rest their heads on her lap, and she will pet them. And there's a broader purpose to this in many cases. It's not just showing that they enjoy being petted, but it's not uncommon for a shark to have a hook buried in the mouth from a fishing encounter. And a lot of fishermen will just cut the hook rather than try and deal with the business end of an unhappy shark. And so by caressing them and getting them into a hyper relaxed state, they can then, Christina and other people who do this can then take pliers or bolt cutters and remove a hook from the fish's mouth. Here's an example of with a blue shark, about a 7-foot long blue shark, photographed by a colleague of mine, Teresa Guys. And you can see the ponderously large fishing hook buried in the mouth and face of this unfortunate blue shark. This blue shark approached the divers, swam around, and one may argue whether a shark may know that a human might help them. There's anecdotal support for this among manta rays, whales, and dolphins, and this sort of thing. Sharks are long-lived, often. Well, we know that from an earlier slide of the Greenland shark, and they're smart. They've got big brains, and they learn, and they navigate. They do a lot of clever things. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that a shark may recognize that a human, in some contexts, might be able to help them. Anyway, long story short, they had bolt cutters, the dive team. They cut this hook out, they removed this hook, and the shark continued to swim around for a short while. Gratitude, who knows? It's been suggested for whales and maybe manta rays. So manta rays are close relatives of sharks. We shouldn't dismiss the possibility that a shark can show gratitude for a deed well done. Another emotion, boredom. Can a fish feel bored? Can a fish play? This is a still photograph from a study of 3 cichlid fishes of this particular species, 3 males who were individually housed in separate tanks, probably a bit of a boring existence after a while to not have any social company. Each 3 independently started to would interact every day with a semi-buoyant thermometer in each tank. The thermometer would move and kind of come back to them. So one suggestion was that it was like using a punching bag or a boxing, and avoiding the return movement from the thermometer. And each fish had different ways, idiosyncratic ways of interacting with the thermometer. One would push it to the corner and pin it there and box it, and other ones would do different things with it. So it shows the individuality. It shows what fits the criteria, for pretty stringent criteria for play behavior in an animal. And also what I think, I'm not sure if they'd even discussed boredom in the study, but boredom would appear to be part of what motivates this play behavior, trying to relieve boredom. So I hope you're not getting too bored yourselves. I want to finish up with a sort of a survey of the troubled relationship that fishes have with our species. Fishes have had the misfortune of evolving in a different milieu to us. Now, we treat terrestrial vertebrates pretty darn awful in many contexts, of course, and I will touch on that shortly. But fishes are routinely relegated to the cellar of vertebrate life. They're the least, we give the least consideration for them. I think, based partly on some of the evidence that I presented today, this is undeserved. I think it's just biases that are deeply built in. Fishes, we don't hear what they say. They're actually, as you know now, they communicate in many ways, but they also communicate with sounds. In many species are named for the sounds they make, like grunts and sea robins and the like. It's just that we don't hear them out here in the air. We don't hear the sounds they're making. We have to take underwater microphones, and then we hear all sorts of sounds going on. They also don't blink. So we don't hear them vocalize if they're in pain, and we don't see them blink. They don't need to blink. Their eyes are bathed in water. So these are just some of the bases of perhaps of the biases that we hold against them. So they're cold-blooded, quote unquote. Actually, it turns out that tunas and some other fishes can warm their blood up, so they're not truly cold-blooded, or many species are not. But we've had these biases against them for a long time. And lo and behold, a pattern that's unfortunately familiar to many of you probably is that we've caused a great deal of destruction to marine habitats and their inhabitants, and freshwater habitats, of course, as well. We could replace the phrase marine life here and with insects, for instance, and you would have the same pattern. Estimated that we've lost half in the last half century. And there's a number of existential threats to all life, but including marine life. Climate change and global warming is one critical one. Oceans are becoming less basic, less alkaline, more acidic. So ocean acidification is another problem, which often was thought to contribute, along with warming oceans, to what's called coral bleaching, where corals, which live symbiotically with algae, cast off the algae. They're apparently, because they're stressed, and they can't survive long without that relationship. There is some evidence that corals can recover if they're given the chance to, but we need to take action to help that to happen. Ocean plastics, in particular fishing waste, the amount is horrendous. An estimate of 640,000 tons of fishing gear are lost or discarded each year, and some of it washes up on beaches, but some of it also floats around in the ocean, continuing to wreak havoc on ocean wildlife, as does the insidious problem of microplastics. Tiny little beads used for exfoliants and other purposes, such as these, which look just like fish eggs and therefore are consumed with baby predatory fish, such as this pike, which cannot digest them, and it's lethal to them. Also, tiny little bits of larger plastic end up breaking down into what are called microplastics. Quintillions of these pieces are floating around in the oceans today, huge amounts. But really, the biggest threat to ocean life, to fishes, as with terrestrial animals today, is our appetite for them. 98%, almost all of the animals humans kill are killed to be eaten, which is why I think this is probably the most dangerous tool on the planet today. I meant to show chopsticks here too, and I neglected to put them in, but I think it's in another slideshow. Nobody knows how many fishes humans kill each year to eat, but they're measured in weight, and it's typically about 100 million tons a year. And if you do some math, you extrapolate, it works out to anywhere from several hundred billion fishes at the conservative end to possibly 1 to 2+ trillion a year, depending on who you're asking. No matter how you slice it, it's a huge number, huge numbers of individuals, and it's so important to remember that they are individuals. And it's also it's a cruel and wasteful way to get food, is to catch fish in nets or on long lines or through trawling. And there's the methods, and none of them are good from an ecological or ethical perspective. This is a fishing net from a vessel in Mozambique, a shrimping vessel. You have to look hard to find shrimp in this net. You find a lot of non-shrimp that's called bycatch by the industry, unwanted catch, which is typically dead or dying by the time it hits the boat deck and is discarded. So it's a very wasteful and cruel industry. You may have heard of aquaculture, the fastest growing sector of food production. Whether it be sea nets or inland operations, it's not good for the fishes. They're crowded, they're stressed, they have no control over their life, they can't migrate, they can't choose mates, they can't do the sorts of behaviors that we've been looking at today. And ecologically, if it's sea pens, there's the added issue of concentrated waste. This is essentially factory farming of fishes, concentrated waste, which filters out through the nets easily, of course, and gets into the oceans. Parasites, sea lice, which flourish in these confined populations, and therefore torment and destroy the lives of a lot of these captive fishes. And escapes, which cause genetic contamination of wild populations with sometimes genetically modified captive ones. There's a host of issues, as you can see. One last point to make here: sometimes people will argue that, well, at least with aquaculture, we're taking the pressure off wild fish populations. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Most fishes that humans eat are predatory. They feed on other fish, and the main fish meal, the main type of food fed to them, is still fish meal and fish oil from small so-called forage fish, menhaden, anchovies, herring, those kinds of species. So the pressure is still there. The more aquaculture there is, the more demand there is for these smaller schooling fish species to be caught at sea and fed to them. Nobody wins really. And just this statistic, which I read in The Guardian last year, The Guardian magazine and newspaper based in the UK, I think is very telling. It speaks to how wasteful and how consumptive it is to eat high on the food chain. You can read the numbers. I don't need to read them to you. But the return on investment is very poor when we eat animals. If we eat plants directly, far more efficient way of nourishing populations. This almost knocked me out of my chair when I read these numbers. This was from a paper studied in, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, a very prestigious journal, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And you can see the plight of wild animals. This is terrestrial, mind you. This is not including fishes, but you might find some parallels if somebody does the numbers with fishes. But on land, humans and our livestock, our desire for meat is taking up almost all the space and wild animals are just being crowded out. Now, I don't want to be too pessimistic here. I mean, we can take steps, we can do things, but it just underscores what we, I think, already know. We have to act now. We can act as individuals because food choices are something we can affect immediately. The choices of food that we eat. Just one more point about the environment is it's as you may know, the International Panel on Climate Change, the numbers that they've crunched show that animal agriculture releases more greenhouse gases into the environment than the entire transportation sector combined. So back to eating habits, we do have a choice in what we eat, and that's very empowering. I don't know about this audience, but if folks are in this audience continue to eat animal products, I encourage you to revisit your food choices. Whenever we order meat, whenever we buy meat at the supermarket or order it at a restaurant, we're telling the manufacturer, whatever you did to get it there, please do it again. We really don't want to be sending that message. We want to be saying, don't do that. And the best way we can say that, or one way, is to simply not fund the industry. Simply don't buy the product. And fortunately for those of us living in developed nations, at least, there's choices. You can actually have your fish and eat it too. I don't know if you've tried this product. It's widely available. It's delicious. It is not health food. But it's very yummy, and I sometimes use it to impress friends who still eat higher on the food chain than I do. And there's a very, very rigorous, rapidly expanding food sector now, where companies like Plantish are producing I haven't tried this product. This is an Israeli company, I think. They're producing salmon-like products. This one is made from plants. Really, all animals are made from plants. Ultimately, plants feed all creatures in the food chain. Blue Nalu is an example of a company making tuna from tuna cells. So that's the other thing. There's the plant-based, like we just saw, and then there's the cell-based, the lab-grown or cultured meat, if you want to call it that. Finless Foods is another example of the latter category. This is, I forget the name of the companies. Perfect Day made the cream cheese here, and that's an interesting innovation because that company's approach is actually to chemically mimic and chemically produce the dairy that would come from a cow, to imitate it exactly based on chemistry. I haven't tried this product. Some people may not feel the desire to, but I'm hopeful that this sort of product may be an important a tool for getting people to eat lower on the food chain. And just to finish up with coming back to the other way that we so often think of fishes as not if not a source of food, then a source of recreation. A plug for my book, which David mentioned in the intro. For a long time I felt like we need to validate the natural feelings that a lot of kids have when they're taken out fishing. I, for one, when I was 8 years old, introduced to fishing, I was shocked and very worried about. I was worried about the worms on the hook as well as the fishes being pulled out of the water. And so I wrote this book to validate those genuine, natural feelings of empathy and concern that so many children, I think, do feel. And just to close, I like the notion of karma, the idea that what goes around comes around, that just as cruelty is indivisible, kindness and compassion are indivisible ideas. they don't, it's not like there's a total amount of compassion we can have in the world, and if you give too much, you use it all up and there's none left. No, of course, it's the opposite. It builds on itself. The more compassionate we are, the more compassionate the world. If you do a good deed, you're more likely to receive one. So if we're kind to animals, if we're good to animals, it feels good to do that. And it's not just good for them. It's good for society. It's good for our society, because a compassionate society is just that. It's roundly and across the board more compassionate. And so I advocate a much better relationship with animals, fishes included. And that's a society that I'd much rather live in. I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening. And I think maybe there's one more slide, just in case you want to contact me. And David's going to take us through some Q&A.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a fascinating presentation. I have a few minutes here, and I want to ask some follow-up questions, starting on just some of the scientific piece. How should we think about sentience between different species of fish? Do you think it is likely that they are all equal amounts of sentience? Should we be thinking about it as a spectrum? Can we make any comparative claims about fish sentience versus other sorts of animals? I'm curious for your take on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I certainly don't mean to imply that what one species of fish can do, other species, all the other ones can do. I do hope to convey the idea that they are across the board complex individuals with particular skill sets, just as within a species. I mean, people we know in our society, other humans have, some are artistic, some are musical, some are good with words, etc. I'm sure you'd find that kind of diversity within species of fishes, but certainly between species, of course, some species are going to be more artistic than others because it behooves them, and it helps them to survive and be more productive as producing more of their kind and that sort of thing. But I think it's really encouraging that that kind of question would come up. It speaks to the age we're living in. There's a lot more discussion about sentience. Sentience I see in the news much more. It's still a word that most people don't know, but more and more people are becoming familiar with it. It's becoming part of the lingo. There's the journal Animal Sentience, which I've been involved with. It's an online open access journal. I encourage you to check it out. There was a big review article just published in there recently on the question of sentience in crustaceans. A generation ago, when I was in my 20s starting to study biology, the idea of crustacean sentience would be sort of dismissed as kind of a bit, either as a joke or as just simply not worthy of pursuit. That's changing. That's changed, actually. Now scientists are legitimately asking and doing careful studies and asking questions about sentience and linking it to the ethics of how we treat these animals. So that gets a little away from fishes into other marine animals. But I think it's as a general response to your question, yes, levels and nuances about sentience are going to differ across species, but I think the general take-home message remains the same. All fishes are sentient. We need to remember that.
And are there any broad comparative claims we can make about fish sentience versus terrestrial animals, or do we just not know enough at this point to make those claims?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I don't know if anyone's tried to sort of compare that. The part of the challenge here, of course, is that sentience, pain, pleasure, the emotions, the excitement, the joy, the fear, they're manifest, but they're sort of they're private in the sense that we can't actually get inside the body of a fish and experience what the fish is experiencing any more than one human can be inside and have the experiences of another. Simply just not accessible. So that is a challenge. That doesn't mean we have to throw our hands up and say, oh, it's hopeless, we can never know, and therefore why even study it. That was actually the view of science for much of the 20th century, that kind of agnosticism. We can observe and we can see how animals respond to different situations. We can see how they will an animal, if they have a negative experience when they choose something they want, and then given a choice to have something else, and they're given a reward for that. I mean, I was kind of skirting the issue there. Let me be blunt with again another crustacean study, not even a fish study, but the same kind of things have been done. You can present a hermit crab with 2 shells, and the hermit crab is ready to change out of their current shell because they've outgrown it, and they go to the shell that they prefer. And those meddling scientists, they put a little electrode in that gives a mild shock. It's not a nasty, harsh, bad shock, but it's enough to, it's unpleasant. So the crab comes out of the shell and then is presented later, a few hours later, with the same choice. And the crab may start to crawl towards the more preferable shell that they chose before, but then they get there and they start hesitating, and they may actually end up going, after 1 or 2 trials, they'll go into the less preferred shell. That's what we would expect with an animal who not only can feel pain, but has a memory and has a mind and can think and can learn. This hesitancy, this is like, oh, I got a shock when I was in there last time, let's go to this one. Again, I'm not necessarily advocating, endorsing these studies, but they've been done and they're telling. They really speak to, even in invertebrates, which are getting much more attention now, as they should. It speaks to their complexity and their abilities. But back to your question, very hard to compare across species. I'm not sure if we need to. Do we need to really say who's more sentient than the other? It's interesting to ask questions about how animals think and feel. But once again, I come back to my early point from the previous question. Let's at least realize that they are sentient, that they can have days and things happen to them they like, and they can have good days and bad days. They have experience. They're not just alive, they have lives. They don't just have biology, they have biographies.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a point well taken. And I mean, certainly you can look back on philosophers from the 19th century or scientists writing about animals who everybody would acknowledge today are sentient. And, you know, at a certain point in time, it was widely accepted that they were not. So I think, you know, this trend towards an understanding of fish sentience is certainly in line with broader historical trends for other species. I'm curious, you spoke about the quality of life for fish in aqua farming and aquaculture operations. Is there anything we can say about the quality of life for fish in the wild? You spoke about ocean acidification, you spoke about predation, about climate change, you know, fishing hooks. Is there anything we can say about that, or is that again just kind of currently outside the realm of knowledge?
No, I think it's probably within the realm of knowledge, although I don't know of any studies that have particularly addressed that question. But I think it's a pretty safe assumption that in the current era where, excuse me, the Anthropocene, where our human activities are truly beginning to really deeply disrupt ocean habitats and freshwater habitats, that it's safe to say that a lot of fishes are having a tougher time making ends meet, getting by, surviving, reproducing, doing the things that they've evolved to do. So in that way, I think one of the critical differences between, say, a fish in an aquaculture operation where it's very clearly demonstrably a bad quality of life, and fishes in the wild where it's not at all clearly obviously a bad quality of life in many cases. In some cases it may be a polluted river, for instance, that the latter category, they have that thing called freedom, which is such a huge factor in quality of life, to have freedom, because it means that the animal has autonomy as well, that they can make their own choices. They may not sit there in the water thinking about that, but take freedom away, and that's definitely a negative welfare event for any animal.
Yeah, no, super interesting. And I guess it raises the question of anthropomorphizing, which I know you've addressed. And I'm curious, how do you draw the line when you're thinking about fish sentience between anthropomorphizing and, you know, making statements that truly represent, or to the best of our knowledge, what a fish can experience?
You know, we live in a human body, in our human brains, so in a way we can't help anthropomorphizing. We're anthropoid apes, and so we shouldn't be too adverse to anthropomorphizing as long as we're aware of it. And I think it's important to be critically anthropomorphic, as one of my colleagues has called it. Critical anthropomorphism is where you you may sort of commit the sin with a small s of sort of projecting the human experience onto another species. But first, at least know the biology, know the behavior, study the animal, see what makes the animal tick, what are the important things to them. And if you've done that, then you're in a much better position to make some guesses and assumptions. Yes, and ultimately there are somewhat guesses and assumptions, because back to that privacy issue, we can't get inside the animal's body and know exactly how they're experiencing things. But goodness, we can see how they behave. We can see the emotions, the raw emotions, the fear, the lust, the anger, the frustration, the boredom, the excitement. These behaviors, depending on the species and how well we know them, we can recognize those emotions.
Yeah, and so shifting now to some of the social implications of your work, do you have a policy agenda? What are some of the policy implications of the work that you've done?
My goal is very simply to improve the human-animal relationship. Of course, we humans are animals too, but so just pejoratively, I'm using the term animal there as we often use them, but the relationship between humans and all the other animals. My hope, of course, is that will translate into the most fundamental change that anyone can make in their lives to help animals, which is simply to stop eating them. And I do get emails from readers of my books from time to time. Well, my fish book in particular, my last book was about flies, so I don't think many people eat flies anyway. So maybe not so much happening there. Although that insect eating and maggots as animal food is a growing industry. But in the case of fishes, I do get emails from people who say they read the book and it put them on the path to stopping fish, or they stopped eating them immediately. I'm not sure if there's any higher compliment for my own work than that. It's always good to see that happen.
Yeah, and so my last question, I think it's super interesting that you have written this children's book that you talked about at the end of the presentation. I often think about pop culture representations of fish and other animals, and I think that if an alien were to watch a movie like Finding Nemo, for instance, they might assume that fish hold a higher status on our planet than they do. And I'm curious, what goes through your mind when you see a movie like Finding Nemo, when you see kind of pop culture representations of fish? Do you feel there's a disconnect there between, the reality they're faced with in our society, or what goes through your mind?
Is there ever a disconnect? I mean, I'm making a bit of an assumption here, but I doubt very much that the average person who's seen Finding Nemo or Finding Dory or Happy Feet, these clever, well done films, great storylines that make animals, fishes in this case, or penguins, into individuals who speak. The fishes in my book speak too. It's kind of hard to avoid that if you're telling a story about them. But most of the people who see those films go on blithely eating fishes and eating chickens, and that's, to me, is a huge disconnect. We can only hope, and I was actually talking with a couple of friends yesterday about this. We were talking about how film might affect, and the portrayal of animals in film might affect attitudes towards animals. And one hopes that the younger viewers, for which these films are very much directed at, as well as their parents, that the younger ones, they're more malleable, and that it helps to forge some feelings about these animals that they might not otherwise have. Of course, they're continually confronted with this unspoken conflict between, hey, they're created as individuals who talk and have feelings and can have bad things happen to them, and then here's your fish fingers, Johnny. Here, eat your fish. And God, it must be confusing for kids to have those mixed messages where, on the one hand, a fish is portrayed as an individual with concerns and emotions, and then in another context, the next day or that night, here it is on the plate.
Yeah. Well, super interesting, Jonathan. Thank you for this fascinating food for thought. Before we sign off, is there anything else you want to say that you didn't get to? Is there a way that folks can follow your work if they're interested in staying up to speed with what you do next?
Sure, I'll just mention a newsletter that I do. It used to be monthly. I've kind of made it bi-monthly for the time being. It's called All Things Fish, and in brackets and insects or flies, because my recent book Super Fly is about insects. And people can go to my website, www.jonathanbalcombe.com, with a hyphen between my names. It was in the last slide. You can subscribe to it there. And so that's one way where I update, in addition to fishes in the news and that sort of thing, I update people on what I've been up to, just some highlights. So that's something I recommend.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate you taking the time to share this knowledge with our viewers. I'm sure everybody found it super interesting. So thank you.
Thanks, David. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Awesome.